Let's start this session on indeed decent housing for all, and I think it's a very interesting topic. Good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to see that the Housing Week has become so successful and that so many people came to listen to early events and that you're also here this morning. So thank you for participating. Thank you also for joining into the debate in the chats. And it's indeed, I think, very promising that so many people are now closely aware of the need and the importance of the topic of decent housing for all, because it's a topic we are now striving for, because it's clear that we have a housing crisis in Europe. There is a shortage of social and affordable housing. And it's not only in my city, Utrecht, or in Amsterdam, it's everywhere in Europe. And indeed, all member states are dealing with this issue or not dealing with this issue in the appropriate way. And when in a time of an economic crisis, the housing prices still rising rapidly and the waiting lists for social housing are ridiculously long, then I think it's time for the EU to step up. Decent and affordable housing has become unreachable for many people, and I think that's simply unacceptable because having a good roof over your head is a basic right. And when I started in the European Parliament in 2014, housing was hardly on the agenda. There were some cities taking initiatives for their own town in order to tackle the social challenges, but housing was never in the forefront of these initiatives. But that changed, luckily, with the proclamation of the European Pillar of Social Rights in 2017. There was housing mentioned for the first time very explicitly as a social objective, and it reads, access to social housing or housing assistance of good quality shall be provided for all in needs. Unfortunately, from 2017, it didn't lead to immediate action from the side of the European Commission. However, in the meantime, the European Parliament has been taking steps to increase the pressure on the Commission on this topic. In December, we adopted the report, A Strong Social Europe for Just Transitions, which demands more investments in affordable housing in order to cover the needs of low and middle income groups. We have asked for more social housing, and we want the Commission to make sure that 30% of all newly built houses constitute affordable housing for both these incomes, so for the lower and the middle income. Last month, the European Parliament adopted an ambitious report with the title Decent Access to Decent Affordable Housing for All. And the votes on this report showed once again that not everybody in the European Parliament is on the same side in this matter. Many colleagues of the EPP, Renew and ECR didn't stand behind the idea of affordable and decent housing for everyone, but we succeeded in getting this report adopted. Very happy about it. And it's a clear sign to the Commission to take up homelessness and social housing in their social action plan. With such a strong calls from the European Parliament, we think the Commission should follow now. We should have binding targets for the EU and the member states to commit upon. Before we start the first panel, I'd like to give the floor to a good friend and a former colleague of mine, Theresa Griffin, who as an MEP was very committed in fighting energy poverty. And she's now a senior associate of a think tank that works on a safe climate for all. And I think for me, Theresa, my question would be, how can we ensure that the ecological transformation, which is needed, contributes also to reducing inequalities, bearing in mind that most economically and socially disadvantaged people pay proportionately much more for their housing and their heating bills? Theresa, can I give you the floor for a contribution on this?
Thank you, Agnes, and hello, family. It's lovely to see you all. In 2016, the Socialists and Democrats published the first Energy Poverty Manifesto. In 2017, we achieved higher ambition for renewables and energy efficiency. In the governance of the Energy Union, we enshrined fighting energy poverty for the first time in EU law. For every 1% increase in energy efficiency, 3 million homes could be properly renovated and 7 million Europeans lifted out of energy poverty. Buildings are responsible for 40% of energy consumption in the EU and contribute 36% of total emissions. This is why the S&D Group issued a position paper yesterday outlining affordable housing, green buildings and quality jobs as key demands for the renovation market. The renovation wave must build on the European Green Deal and the European Pillar of Social Rights, contributing to ambitious climate and social goals, building for a recovery that leaves no one behind, engaging and consulting with citizens through climate assemblies. The green transition and renovation wave will not succeed if our most vulnerable citizens are not on board. The cost of renovations is often too high for our most vulnerable households, and we must make energy efficient renovation affordable for all. An EU framework to fight energy poverty, target energy efficient measures on energy poor citizens, improve retail market conditions to support energy poor citizens, promote energy self-consumption, ban disconnections, automatically place citizens on the cheapest energy tariff. The fast and efficient implementation of the renovation wave strategy can be a real win-win. Emissions can be cut, climate action taken, local jobs created, and living conditions improved for huge numbers of Europeans. Today, 50 million Europeans are in energy poverty. From now on, Agnes, no citizen should have to choose between eating or cooling or heating their homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Theresa, for that. And it's good to have you passionately talking about this topic, but also pointing out to the issue that it can be done, that people don't have to choose between heating and cooling or food. And if it can be done, we have to take care that it will be done. So this is high on our list of urgencies. As are also other topics. So my first panel will be a panel on homeless people and the right to decent housing. I first give the floor to Freek Spinnewijn from FEANTSA. He's the director. And perhaps, Freek, can you introduce us to the scope and the nature of homelessness problems in Europe, and can you also explain why housing problem is such a big problem in Europe, and what are your thoughts to do about this at the EU, the national and the local level? Freek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Agnes. I hope you hear me well. You hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Perfect. Yeah, and all of that in 8 to 10 minutes. I'll do my best. Let me first start by saying that I entirely agree with what you said in your introduction, that there is too little social and affordable housing at the moment in the European Union. Let's be clear about that. We support the claim that we need to invest more in social and affordable housing. That's one. But let me first share you a few data about homelessness. I think it's important to sort of pitch the nature and the scope of homelessness to the audience. We believe, there is no official EU data, but we believe that there is at least I have to say 700,000 people in the EU, but I'm saying EU plus the UK because the latest estimation dates from when the UK was still with us. There is at least 700,000 people that live on the street or in a homeless shelter on any given day in the European Union. That's 0.14% of the population. And maybe it's annoying and not pleasant to hear, but actually it's not much better than the US if you compare proportionally to the population. So we're on the issue of homelessness. We're actually not doing so much better as the US, in spite of the pride we hold in our social protection systems. It's something to take into account. But maybe more important than the total number is that we have seen an increase of 70% in the last 10 years. 70. So that's a massive increase. There is something happening at the bottom end of society which is really concerning. If you compare that to the evolution of the people living in poverty measured by the AROPE, it's actually quite stable over the last 10 years. So if you go down to the extreme forms of poverty like homelessness, you see massive increases, and that should be an issue of concern. Of course, if you look at the number of people that experience homelessness over the period of a year, because not everybody is constantly, chronically homeless, you are in the millions. We estimate 3 to 4 million people. And quite concerning is that there is a chronification of homelessness. I don't know if that's English, but it means that people are homeless for longer periods of time, which is also an issue of concern. And very quickly, in terms of profile, the predominant profile is still male and middle-aged, but we see a rapid increase amongst young migrants, also in North Europe these days, and family homelessness is also in the increase in many countries. And in terms of the sector, it's also quite important to say that the sector is growing, but growing in terms of beds in shelter. And I'm not sure if that's a good evolution. We estimate that there is at least 600,000 beds in shelter, and that's an enormous growth over the last 10 years. And that comes with a cost, of course. In a country like France, the audit office recently published a report, and they estimate that France spends 4 billion euro per year on shelter, just shelter. So that's also an issue to be concerned about. Let me move on to two inconvenient truths. Just to provoke a little bit of debate, Agnes, if you are in agreement. We see homelessness growing everywhere, which means that there is no obvious link between the level of homelessness and the strength of the social welfare system. Even countries with very strong social welfare systems seem unable to stop the growth in homelessness. Take, for instance, France and Denmark as examples. So we need something more than just a robust welfare system. That's the point I want to make. The other thing, which is maybe a little bit of an inconvenient truth, is that there seems to be no direct link between the level of homelessness and the size of the social housing sector. So it's not enough to have a lot of social housing. Even in countries like the Netherlands, we have seen a massive increase in homelessness. It doubled in the last 6-7 years. So I'm not arguing, of course, against a lot of social housing, but it's not sufficient to address the issue of homelessness. I think we have to also discuss the allocation mechanisms and the prioritization of homeless people. I don't believe in the sort of trickle-down effect of social housing, that if you focus on the middle-income groups, that at the end of the day, also homeless people will benefit from it, like Vice President Timmermans said in the opening speech. Homelessness is obviously a housing issue. In the first place, you need housing to address homelessness. To get people out of homelessness, you need housing. That's obvious. But I think it's good to state that again here. And the success of Housing First, I'm not going into detail, shows how important immediate access to housing is to get homeless people back into society. Housing is also important for prevention of homelessness, but I don't think you can prevent homelessness by, you can totally prevent homelessness or the emergence of homelessness by just stopping evictions. There is other routes into homelessness: institutional release, people released from prison, people released from other institutions. That's also a route that you cannot prevent through stopping evictions. But of course, prevention of eviction is an important way to address homelessness as well. Now, for most people, like if I say addressing homelessness, you have to do by offering housing. The easiest way to do that is to access social housing. It's the easiest and most logical way out of homelessness for homeless people. I hear, and I heard the debates this week, I hear some people saying we should also responsibilize the private sector and mobilize them to house homeless people. I would like to know from you and the audience, how can that ever be an efficient use of public money? But I'm open for the discussion. Very quickly, Agnes, 3 misconceptions about social housing, and I share them with moderation because I'm not an expert on social housing. But I hear constantly that social housing should not only be for the most vulnerable. And I agree, it should not be for the most vulnerable. But by repeating that message, I think we give the impression as if social housing currently is only for the most vulnerable, which it is not. If you look at the social housing sector prioritizing homeless people effectively, you probably end up with a handful of countries. So the large majority of social housing companies don't prioritize homeless people. So I think I agree that it should not only be for the most vulnerable, but let's not create the illusion as if it is only for the most vulnerable, because homeless people have difficulties and struggle to access it. I also hear, I also think that we have to be careful not to give the impression as if the social housing stock is massive in most countries. It's not. It's small in most European countries, less than 10%. And that begs the question, should we actually adapt the ambitions for social housing to the stock that is available? And I have the impression that sometimes the agenda at European level is framed by countries with a big social housing stock and not those with a small social housing stock. So that's 2 things that I wanted to share. Now, to end about EU action. We welcome the request for EU action that have been shared during the week. Maybe one point that I'm a little bit disappointed about is the petition that has been launched. Is a petition launched under the banner of the right to housing. If there is one urgent housing rights violation, it's homelessness and the growth in homelessness. But there is nothing in the petition on homelessness. I really wonder, how can we talk about the right to housing and not talk about homelessness? That housing rights logic requires to focus on the most urgent cases first. So I would beg you to include a call for EU action on homelessness. Also because there will be an EU action on homelessness. So it would be in line with the ambitions. Commissioner Schmidt, who is from your political family, has announced the creation of an EU collaboration platform on homelessness. It will be launched at a high-level event by the Portuguese presidency on the 21st of June. We're currently discussing the possible activities. I think that's where the petition can play a role. Like, it's also up to the progressive to come up with ideas of what this collaboration platform could do. We count obviously on the support of the S&D in the European Parliament. The support has already been expressed. If I can end by making one last comment. I think in relation to EU action, we have to make sure that we don't mix our demands on housing market and our demands on homelessness. For a simple reason. There is a political consensus that there needs to be EU action on homelessness. You forgot to mention, Agnes, that the European Parliament voted a resolution on homelessness in November last year. It was voted by 95% of the MEPs. In more than half of the EU member states, every MEP voted for more action on EU homelessness. I'm, of course, incredibly happy that the report of Kim van Spantak has been adopted, but it has been voted in favor by a little bit more than half of the European Parliament. And it shows that there is less of a consensus on some of the housing market interventions. And I agree with the housing market interventions you propose, but let's not obstruct the progress, the rapid progress we can make on homelessness by mixing it too much with some of the bigger demands on housing, which I support. So that's what I wanted to say. Agnes, I'm happy to enter into the discussion and answer the questions.
Okay, thank you, Freek, for a very clear position you take, which is in a way a end-end. You are pointing us to don't forget homelessness as a separate issue, although it's also important to talk about decent and affordable housing for everyone. Thank you for this comment. And now I'm giving the floor to my colleague Manuel Pizarro. Also interested, Manuel, to hear from you how you comment on the introduction of Freek, taking into account your work in the S&D family, but also in your past experience at the national local level, especially in the Porto municipality. Manuel, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Agnes, and thank you, Freek, for your inspiring points, because I think that the first thing that we should do about all this, of all those two issues, housing and homelessness, is to speak about them. We cannot, for our ideological position imposes to us that we put always those questions at the center of the debate. And as Agnes pointed out in their introduction, during a lot of years, housing issues were out of the main priorities of the European Union. And I think that we must correct that. About homelessness, of course, we know the figures and they are frightening. Not only the number of people who lives in the streets or in shelters, but also the frightening reality that they have increased in most member states. And even in a member state like mine, Portugal, where the number has not increased, we cannot be happy with the idea that thousands, millions of citizens live in the complete poverty, because the issue of homelessness is in a large part the issue of the poverty and the sustained poverty in the European Union. They are the extreme poverty, and we should address the issue of poverty embedded in the issue of the homelessness. Of course, the problem of homelessness is not just a problem of access to housing. And it is not even only a problem of disponibility of housing, because the reasons that create that situation are quite varied, and they impose a multidisciplinary and integrated approach covering a lot of other issues other than housing, as health, social, cultural, psychological aspects, administrative burden that is imposed to them makes a lot of answers difficult to use from those kind of people. This is precisely the spirit of the Housing First program, and I think it's quite important to create conditions to the use of that program in all European countries, and to the public European founding of those programs in the different European causes. We should address the root causes of homelessness if we want to tackle homelessness, and we must fight against poverty. And I think that there is a very important debate now is the consequences of the pandemic crisis to the most poor, because we know that they are asymmetric consequences, and that we know that the risk of poverty is going to increase. We should be sure that the European money, mainly the money of the MFF and of the EU, Next Generation EU, can and should be used to tackle poverty, and in that way to have a direct action in the homelessness people. We cannot postpone any longer a European action plan for homelessness. I fully agree with Freek. With ambitious goals to reduce the number of people in in that dire situation and simultaneously prevent citizens to fall in that situation. It should be linked, of course, with the broader European anti-poverty strategy, and I think that we should not forget that the action plan for the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights can be a very important tool in this regard. We know that one of its 20 principles is the access to decent housing for all. And in that regard, we have a calendar because, as we heard, Commissioner Nicole Smith will present the action plan for the implementation of the European Pillar in March. And I'm confident that during Portuguese presidency of the Union, in the Porto Summit that will happens in my hometown in May, we will give a major political impetus to the action plan that will be presented by the Commissioner Schmidt. I believe that we can arrive to get concrete and ambitious commitments also regarding homelessness and combining that issue with affordable housing. As you know, one of the priorities that the Portuguese presidency announced was really put the social dimension of at the heart of the EU policies. I think that Freek brought to us one other issue that must be addressed, is the issue of reliable data. I think that perhaps we can do more in the European Parliament, asking the Commission and asking the Eurostat to have reliable and comparable data about the homelessness problem, because to not have data is one other way of exclusion. If they are not in the official statistics is as if they don't exist, and we cannot accept that. I think that we should really put the fight against homelessness to solve the extreme poverty at the main priority of our social intervention in Europe. Will we ever be spared to the painful sight of women, children and men living in streets, sleeping rogue at the doorsteps of bank agencies and political institutions, as we see in the European Parliament? I think that we should never let them out of our political scopes, and we should not resign ourselves to the contradiction that is to have a growing number of homelessness people in the most prosperous and socially progressive region of the world. We cannot be proud of our social model, and when we have so many people living outside it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Manuel, and thank you also for pointing out this very strange sight. Walking to the building of the European Parliament, people who know the building know the whole square has a lot of small corners where people are sleeping from 6 o'clock in the afternoon till early in the morning. It's in a way also highly symbolic that the problem is at our doorstep for debates. I saw that Robin van Leijen mentioned a way of combining the fight against homelessness with the fight for decent and affordable housing, because Freek, you are pointing out the one that you don't believe in the trickle-down theory. It's not with affordable housing the problem of homelessness solves as of and there it's gone. Robin is pointing out to the system where in the Netherlands the local communities has the opportunity to give notes of urgencies to homeless people, therefore combining the push for social housing and the push for fighting homelessness. And you respond in the chat, Freek, that you find this a promising development. Do you have other of these promising developments, or are we just, and thank you also for pointing out to the resolution of the European Parliament of earlier this year, are we starting from scratch and just have to wait what Commissioner Smit on the 3rd of March is coming up on the social action plan? Do you have other promising developments?
You want me to answer? Yeah, but I think the initiative of Commissioner Smit to develop this collaboration platform is already quite promising, considering that FEANTSA has been lobbying for the last 20 years for an EU action plan or a new strategy on homelessness. Now we're very close to getting one, so I'm quite excited by that. You know, like I don't want to be too unambitious, but
you don't want to risk it. No.
But I think it's a great development, and the launch has been decided. The Portuguese presidency has made the fight against homelessness a priority, social policy priority. That's great. Like now we have to make this this collaboration platform a success, and I think it's now. And I count also on the S&D and the larger progressive family to contribute ideas to what this collaboration platform can be, and that's what we have to do. What we have to do now. So at European level, I think it's really quite a promising context. Also, the support of the European Parliament has never. I'm now 20 years in FEANTSA. I've never seen so much mobilization in the European Parliament on the issue of homelessness. In the last 5-6 plenary sessions, there was always a report that was adopted where the European Parliament asked for EU action on homelessness. So it has become almost like a standard thing for the European Parliament to do. That's great. Like that's really a strong progress that we welcome. At national level and at local level, yes, there is reasons to be hopeful. I think what happens in the Netherlands, the fact that the government now fell, of course, but that the government sort of tried to use the corona crisis as a momentum to address homelessness in a different way, to invest and focus more on housing solutions for homeless people. That's welcome. That's welcome. And we see it in a number of other countries, in a number of cities as well. But if I look at Europe as a whole, I'm afraid to say that the increase that we have seen over the last decade is not going to stop in the immediate future. You know, like we're afraid that the impact of the corona crisis, the sort of increase in evictions that we expect after the moratoria will be lifted will spill over into an increase in homelessness. So like there is reasons to be hopeful. There is lights here and there that we can build on. There is the ambition of the European Union to help the member states to do better. That's really quite hopeful, but it's necessary because the reality on the ground is quite dire, I have to say.
Okay, thank you. And Freek, thank you for that. Manuel, people pointing in the chats to two separate issues. One, that homelessness should first and foremost addressed at the local level. And there is an interesting report also in the chat of the group Eurocities. I'd like to have your comment on that, but also on the fact that although Freek is saying more affordable housing doesn't solve homelessness per se, there is also this issue of not enough affordable housing available in many member states. So can you respond to these two issues, local level primarily,
Yes.
or indeed also a European push, but also if the one doesn't solve the other automatically, what are we going to do, in your opinion, to make more affordable housing
Thank you, Agnes.
for also lower and middle income?
Thank you, Agnes. Of course, housing is perhaps the most territorial of the policies. Housing is placed in a territory, so of course we must have a local side on the issue, and locals are different one from each other. The reasons why people are in homelessness are different from each other. In some places, the immigration issues are very important. In other towns, they are not at all important. There are issues related with addictions, alcoholism, a lot of mental health disorders. There are a lot of differences, but we should have a European strategy and European goals about the ocean, and even because they are necessary to have European support to those local policies. We should make a global framework, and then, of course, the action must be at the local level. And I want to say that we should not, I fully agree with Freek, that we should not link directly the issues of affordable housing to the issues of homelessness. But what can I say? The affordable housing is not a sufficient condition to solve the homelessness issue, but it's a necessary condition. If we don't provide affordable housing, should it be social or in other perspective, we will not have enough conditions to solve the homelessness issue. I think that perhaps we should change the taxonomy and speak about public housing and not social housing, because in the public housing property there are different uses of the housing. In a country like mine, in Portugal, we have only 2% of public housing, of social housing, and so they are really social housing, because when you have only 2% of the housing stock in the public property, of course, we are using that only for social reasons. But I fully agree that we should clarify the language. One last point. Shelter is better than the street to stay at night, but a shelter is not a house. A shelter does not allow people to have a completely dignity in his life and to build a project of life to those people. So the shelter are important, but it's very important to not let create an institutionalization of the homelessness, putting them out of the street in shelters quietly. And this is not citizenship. To have really citizenship, a person needs a house, and we should also focus on that, because shelters are a good solution in a short transition period, not for the entire life of people. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that last point, because I think it's indeed important. Perhaps a little example also from my home country, where in The Hague they have put new street banks for people to sit on, and they with all this separate separation, just to prevent people in the streets. And there is still an issue if and the way I behaved as a little child. If you put your hand before your eyes, you could not see the problem, and then as a little child you could think that if I don't see it, it's not there anymore. But we know it's there, and we know that indeed attention is necessary. I take from your contribution, Manuel, also the call for data, because I think this is indeed necessary. Susanne Bauer put in the chat the remark that ensuring access to houses for homelessness should be done by national and local governments, because they know what the needs of their citizens are. But she combines this with the call they should have the support and the mandate to manage allocation issues, and we would answer that, and they should also have the funding available for making this task, which is a big task, and in some member states even growing, which also make this done. And we are now in the Parliament in the last phases of agreeing on the multi-annual framework, on the ESF Plus, on the FEAD program, etc., to also point to the need of having this money available for those most in need. I think we're pushing in the right direction, and we have big. And there are some contributions in the chat on state aid rules. For instance, Robin, but that's indeed part of the second panel, where I also would pose the question which Freek touched upon earlier. Should we expect private partners being part of the solution, or are they part of the problem? Do we expect the private sector to solve the issue of affordable and decent housing? And Manuel says no. Says no too. I think this is a thing which is important, and luckily Theresa is also still involved in the debate. She said Manuel is completely right that shelter is a solution, but we have to talk about citizenship and dignity. So for the kickoff of this debate, I'd like to thank you warm heartily, Freek and Manuel. Please stay for the second panel, because some of the issues you touched upon will also be dealt with in the second panel. But can I now introduce my guest for the second panel of this phase? The second panel is on no harmful competition and promoting decent housing for all. There we have two panelists, and the first one is Barbara Steenbergen from the International Union of Tenants. I think I can say, Barbara, that you have been a supporter of the S&D involvement, engagement in housing. And I'm just posing the question to you: what do you think? What do you wish? What do you expect the Commission to respond to the recent opinions of the European Parliament? Because it is clear, I'm not taking your turn, but I think it's clear that austerity and state aid rules have totally discouraged investment in affordable housing. But at the same time, we also have the Green Deal on the table, the renovation wave. Perhaps this is a way of addressing part of the problems. Housing cost, affordability, co-management of residents, all must be targeted. I should say, Barbara, the floor is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Agnes. Good morning to everybody here and on Facebook. Good morning for joining. First of all, a short introduction of the International Union of Tenants. We represent tenants worldwide. We are present in 71 countries with national and regional and local tenants unions. So we are a real grassroots movement, and we are coming also from the social movement. We are quite old. We have been established in 1926, fighting for the right to housing, fighting for the rights of tenants, fighting for decent living conditions for the people. So this as a start. Let me start also with some figures. I think it is very important, if we talk about affordable housing, that we take a look how the housing market is structured a little bit in Europe. Do not forget that 1/3 in Europe of all the people are living in rental housing. They are not homeowners. And being a tenant living in rental housing is, let's say, a less secure way of living. So my discourse today will be about achieving more security of tenure, because I do think this is the crucial point. Having security of tenure, this is the right way to fight homelessness, to fight evictions, to fight poverty because of increasing housing costs. Security of tenure means to have a safe home which you can live in for a lifetime. And this is something, a roof over the head, which is a crucial point to recognize that as a fundamental right, and a crucial right that has to be more underlined also at European level. So this as a start. Second thing, I do think that so far we did a great job in the parliament, and my special thanks are really going to the Socialists and Democrats group. You gave us with the 2 reports you made on social and affordable housing so much support in our claims. And I do think the parliament is on our side. But now, as you rightly pointed out, Agnes, what shall we do now with the Commission? What shall we do now with the member states? Because we all have good ambitions. We all are standing side by side. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, I do believe in united fights, in concerted fights. I do think if you want housing, this includes housing for the homeless, for the vulnerable groups, for the little incomes, the small incomes, for the median incomes, all together. And this is the fight that we should do at European level. Yes, Parliament is on our side. But what about the Commission? You know, I have the impression that the Commission is giving a lot of, let's say, lip services, excuse my French, because they're saying, yeah, we are in favor, but at least the member states have to do something. This is not our competence. That's correct. I totally agree, for instance, with the debate we had before that allocation rights should remain at city level, at regional level. But we are also talking about European legislation, which is blocking investment in affordable and social housing. By the way, please let's always talk about affordable and social housing, because otherwise our friends from Scandinavia are not in. They do not have social housing, they have affordable housing. So I think it is very important to check this investment problem that we have. In the report of the European Parliament from Kim van Sparrentak, it is pointed out that the investment gap is currently 57 billion euro per year. Imagine that. And it is, let's say, the biggest gap that we have since the global financial crisis. So from 2008 on, and even from the years before, where we also had a massive privatization of social and affordable housing all over Europe. Because then the international investors came and they bought our social and affordable housing stock, which we now desperately lack everywhere. So this is a global problem, a global economic problem. And we started this wonderful housing week with the film of the Push, Lailani Farah. I think she pointed out very clearly how this problem of financialization of the housing market occurred, how we lost our possibilities to steer housing markets as cities, as member states, because we sold our social housing stock to the private sector, and now the private sector rules. So this is a massive problem. So coming back to the point, what can the EU Commission do? The EU Commission can, of course, deblock this investment. And one extremely crucial point is to have state aid rules for social and affordable housing, which are good for investment, which means very, very concretely, we need to get rid of the narrow target group definition for social and affordable housing in the state aid rules. The EU DG Competition announced a review many, many times, but this crucial point, it is still in. It is still in, and we still have to fight to get rid of the narrow target group definition for social housing, because this is something which is very harmful for investors. Investors want to have planning, reliability. They want to move in a framework which is clear and transparent. But how can they really invest in affordable housing when they still have to fear a procedure of DG competition? So this is one major claim that the International Union of Tenants is fighting for. We had many competition complaints on that. The Swedish case, the Dutch case, the French case, the Luxembourg case. So obviously something is going on. And obviously something is going on which is not good for our social and affordable housing providers. So we have to solve this. And we need the help of the Commission on that. My second point on that, state aid rules, very important. But second point is we also will have some funding. We will have funding on the renovation wave. We have funding for cohesion policy. We have funding for fighting the homelessness and for more affordable housing. We have the new Affordable Housing Initiative, just launched now as a part of the EU Green Deal. But my point is actually, if we have funding, shouldn't we also apply clear rules to prevent capitalization of funding and to move housing markets into the right direction? What do I mean by that? I mean, if there is public funding, there should be a clear rent stabilization mechanism, rent caps, clear housing allocation rules for housing those who need it. If there are private investors, and that was your question also, Agnes, those private investors have to do this. They have to play by the rules of the social housing investors. And they also have to play by the other rule, not just investing in a building, but investing in an entire quarter. I'm talking about social and green infrastructure. This is what the social and affordable housing providers do. You know this. They build green spaces, parks, kindergartens. It's not just only the building. So this is something I think the European Commission should apply very clearly in their public procurement rules, in their funding rules, also in line with the new funding that we will supply together with the European Investment Bank. So a clear demand of the International Union of Tenants, if you want to do this, clear rules and obligations, because this is then the milestone for delivering security of tenure. Thank you for the beginning.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Thank you for this very clear message for the calls to the European Commission. Can I now ask Estrella also to take part of this panel? Estrella Dura Ferrandis, she is also a colleague from Spain, and I'm going to ask you, Estrella, how do you react to the introduction Barbara gave? Do you think it's essential to change the state aid rules? What do you think about control of rental prices as a measure to ensure affordable housing for all? And what do you think about the role of the private sector in solving the issues at the table? Estrella, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Agnes. Thank you, Barbara, also for your presentation. I hope we have time to debate, but in general, we are on the same boat. We are defending the same lines, as I am going to explain. I think this is a great event, just in a moment when the European Parliament, has adopted the report on access to decent and affordable housing. This report has highlighted the current housing crisis in Europe and further complicated by the pandemic, and has proposed measures to address it. We have, S&D Group, managed to include some very ambitious and progressive proposals that have, in some cases, overcome the obstacles made by the right wing. As a great achievement, I would like to highlight the inclusion of the housing sector in the list of services of general economic interest, which therefore excludes it from the competition and state aid rules. But unfortunately, another proposal was rejected, which included the need for a regulation that limits housing rental prices and tries to curb speculation in the real estate market. I will focus my intervention mainly on these two topics. Regarding the first proposal about including housing in the framework of services of general interest, I must say that it's good news because it would represent enormous progress. It would give countries full freedom to implement housing plans, public housing plans, and provide as much as social housing as they deem necessary. It would also expand the target group, as Barbara was asking, for the middle class people and not only the most vulnerable. Housing is a fundamental right and one of the pillars of the welfare state. Therefore, it must be excluded from the rules of competition in the same way that social spending must be excluded from the fiscal policies. We want to move toward a universal model of housing to cover the needs of all. We, therefore, need a new model of governance in the EU in which social investment and specifically investment in housing is included in national recovery plans. Housing affordability should be included in the European semester, and national reforms programs should include national affordable housing plans. For this reason, as Agnes also said in her introduction, we have proposed to establish objective indicators for the provision of affordable housing for member states. Specifically, we submitted an amendment to the plenary in which we asked the Commission to request member states to ensure the provision of social housing for the needs of the three bottom quintiles of society, and to implement a standard that at least 30% of all new houses should be affordable for lower and middle income groups. However, neither the Right Wing nor paradoxically the Greens supported this amendment, and it was not finally included in the report. Finally, I was also to highlight in the same line that Barbara, that at this point, we managed to introduce in the report the consideration of social housing policies from a border perspective, which also involves investing in recreational and sport facilities, community centers, or green spaces. It also includes the concept of green social housing, sustainability criteria, and support for the circular economy. Well, this is the good news, but the bad news, however, is that the right wing has preferred that the control of rental prices and measures to curb speculation in the property market is not recognized at European level. So I would like to emphasize some ideas, some socialist ideas in this line. Regarding rent, already some countries apply measures to control rental prices with good results. Taking the policies of these countries as an example is important. Of course, always take it into account the specificities of each country and within each country and their localities. Given the current crisis in the housing sector, the most important today, more than ever, is to increase the public stock of social rental housing. It's increasingly evident that there are sectors of the population that have serious difficulties to afford a home in the free market. Moreover, homelessness is on the rise. And I am not just talking about those people who live in the streets, but also hidden homelessness. People who stay with their parents because they can't afford to have their own place to live. So it's necessary to create an affordable public rental housing stock, addressing to specific sectors such as young people and older families that allocate more than 40% of the salary to housing rental cost. At this point, I would like also to take the opportunity to regret the rejection of a particular socialist amendment. We propose setting the housing cost of a burden rate at no more than 25% of a household disposable income. In fact, maintaining the current 40% is a way of denying the difficult situation of families, since not even banks approve any loan whose monthly fee exceeds 35%. There are many models of public rental offer in many cities, and it should keep growing. There is also a way inside the free market to maintain the collaboration with private investors. It has been verified that there is a business margin for the investor or developer, while at the same time generating a housing stock with limited profit, of course. For instance, the Spanish government has approved recently a plan to configure for the first time a true public supply of rental house at social or affordable prices in Spain. The objective of the government is to give to the developers and construction companies part of the public land at zero cost during a period of time, 75 years. During all this time, the companies, in addition to building the properties, must process and manage affordable or social rents. After this period, the houses will return to the public park. So there are several ways to improve the public rental housing stock. But another relevant point about renting is that a balanced regulatory regime must be established between the rights and duties of owners and tenants, with the aim of generating legal security on one hand and stability and control of abusive price increases on the other. We must also promote policies that encourage the rehabilitation of the existing residential park through tax incentives, subsidies, or the elimination of fees, linking them to an increase in the supply of rental housing. To this end, countries need tax reforms that incorporate tax benefits and deductions to make it attractive for owners to rent their homes and facilitate access to the tenant. Transparency on property and real estate transactions is also vital to prevent distortion in the housing market and to prevent money laundering in this sector. To conclude, it's not only a matter of opting for just one of the measures, but rather to coordinating efficiently and implementing most of them. It's important to coordinate at the different levels of the competent administration, state, regional, or local. This is why we are calling also in our report for an integrated EU strategy and a new model of governance in the EU to create a favorable framework for national, regional, and local authorities to guarantee housing for all. This is all from my side.
Okay. Thank you, Estrella. Yeah, no. Thank you for this contribution and also for pointing out the needs to coordinate between the different policy levels. Luckily, Monica has put in the chat also recent opinions from the Committee of the Region, which is also pointing out how indeed at the regional level people can be active and help. The issue of taxation was not mentioned by you, Barbara. Do you think taxation is that a way of involving private partners, or should I really give up on the idea that private partners are so you describe them as part of the problem because we sold our affordable houses to them, but can they play a role in solving the problems? And is taxation policy, next to what you said about funding and state aid rules, also a area where we have to look.
Absolutely, absolutely. As I pointed out, housing is not only, the housing shortage is not only a social problem, it's an economic problem. So taxation is extremely crucial. Let me give you an example from my home country, Germany. I also worked for more than 10 years in Berlin for the protection of tenants. And Berlin is, I think, in Europe, the city with the highest share of tenants. We are nearly 90% there. So there must be a reason that people used to like to rent in Berlin, but now this is also a little bit changing. No, taxation. We sometimes open the door to the wrong people investing. For instance, in Germany, we have those phenomenon of those share deals, where you can avoid by a merger a complete tax payment, which would otherwise go to the public budget and enable them to build more affordable and social housing. So we have some favorable framework on real estate investment trusts. Real estate investment trusts are a kind of pool for people wanting to make money with a lot of housing, and also a pool for making it possible to speculate and trade with housing. And all these, let's say, financial things, they have not been mentioned yet. And I'm very happy that Estrella mentioned it, because this is a part of a homework we have to do also with the European Commission. And there we have to work not only with competition, but with DG ECFIN. We have to work with those fighting against money laundering, fighting against illegal practices. And I think the crucial point would be definitely that we would have a kind of EU transparency register on big real estate transactions, so we know who enters our market and who wants to speculate with housing. We did not manage to get this in the report, Estrella. I was also not happy about that, but there was a clear no of the conservatives and the liberals. That was one step too far. Nevertheless, and then I point to the member states, we can also make our national real estate registers more transparent. And we can find also a way how to fight this illegal investment in housing. I'm also talking about this phenomenon of the golden visa that we have. Who is entering the country then? Who is investing, just getting, in a way, the EU doors open, and for what? I'm talking there about Cyprus, I'm talking about Portugal, I'm talking about Greece, where the golden visa are a big problem. So yes, this is the big wheel that needs to be turned. It's not only social policy, it is really also market access. And Agnes, let me end up with a, I think, very crucial point. There is a big issue in decoupling the wages from the rents. This is leading to rent poverty. This is the main issue. The wages are not going up and the rents are skyrocketing high. When I have an average increase of wages, perhaps of 1, 2, 3%, and the rents they raised by 30, 40%, how do we deal with that? What are we going to do with that? And is the Commission also taking an action on that? Because this is something which drives people really into poverty. And people who have a decent job, the policeman, the nurse, the bus driver, the teacher, this is an issue for those groups. And this is also an issue, I think, for the economic framework of the European Commission. Because when we can't have the key workers in our cities, we will lose. We will lose this game.
Thank you for pointing out to that system, because I think this is indeed something which is happening in all member states, also in mine, where indeed people who have to who work in the city as a police agent or as a police officer or as a nurse cannot afford to live in the city anymore, and then are forced to travel a long way, because these are also not the people with a home office and working from home. They have to come to the city to do their job. And indeed, we're talking about housing, but we should also talk about pay rises. Luckily, there is the proposal of the European Commission on minimum wages and more collective bargaining, because we know that more collective bargaining leads to higher wages. But it's good that you point out to this. Theresa also says in the chat, you're right, that the rise of in-work poverty, so not working hard and not being able to pay all your bills, is a important topic. There is from Michaela Kauach also in the chat, so I hope in a way, I don't know, but people from the organization can tell me that we can save the chat in a way, because Michaela has put some links to studies on money laundering through real estate transactions, studies which has already been done. And for you, Estrella, I have the question about how much you were talking about. Should there not be a limit of 25% paying from your income to housing? Is this a realistic demand? Do you have any ideas about, for instance, in Spain, how much on average are people paying on housing? And perhaps this is indeed a two-headed monster. We should push for higher wages, but also for rental control. Do you have any data or facts on this part of the income people are paying to their rental situation, Estrella?
I have no specific concrete data in Spain, but we know that during the last year, since the bubble of the construction sector, more and more people, specifically young people and families, are increasing their cost, overcost in houses, and not only renting, but also the invoice of electricity, gas, and so on. About the prices of rental houses, and more specifically the control of rental prices, that is a polemic topic in between the different political groups. I would like to emphasize the socialist idea that the control of rental prices is clearly an effective measure to generate social welfare and to curb real estate speculation. It's true that people who do not support the control of rental prices point out that this practice distorts the housing market, the rules of competition, or that the construction sector or rental housing is taken off the market. But we think that these adverse effects can be mitigated with complementary measures, such as the implementation of long-term contracts or prices that are controlled during the tenure in a way that the amount of owner can increase the rent is limited, but afterward is open to negotiation with a new tenant. However, the main problem is that in European countries like Spain, almost the entire rental market is on the free market, which makes it too vulnerable to speculative flows. As I say, and Agnes also was pointing out, in Madrid, the result has been invisible eviction. Although we have not seen them and they are not registered, a large number of people have had to move further and further away from the center to rent in the outskirts. So the fact that the prices rise is not a meteorological phenomenon, but rather, like eviction, is something that depends on political decisions. For instance, in Vienna, where 30% is public housing, another 30% is public-private, and only the remainder is on the free market, these upward trends are not generated. So, to conclude, the more public housing intervention there is, the less the need to intervene in rental prices.
Okay. So, Barbara, you want to come back to that? Michaela
Absolutely.
is already putting your recommendation on affordability.
Yes, because I think Estrella mentioned something very, very important. Very, very important. First of all, what we say sometimes is that rent control is like a minimum wage for tenants. Huh? So rent control is a way. This is clear national or local competence, ladies and gentlemen. We acknowledge that. But for instance, where we are so proud of is that we, in a way, exported the Berlin rent freeze. It is in all papers, it's hitting the headlines. We exported this Berlin rent freeze, freezing the rents for 5 years to give the residents room to breathe again in a highly speculative market, jacked up by international investors. We exported this wonderful Berlin rent freeze to Barcelona. So Barcelona is the first city who will also put this into their regulation. Catalonia. We do hope, and there has been, Estrella, as far as I know, a big social movement, grassroots movement in Spain to implement the measure of a rent freeze, like an emergency break for the residents, also in entire Spain. And I do hope that we will manage to do that. We are working currently together also with some Scottish friends for the city of Glasgow, also to implement a rent freeze there. These are concrete measures that we could apply if we want to do it. And this is something I would also like to report back to the work we have been doing before of the EU Partnership for Affordable Housing. There, a group of specialists develop emergency measures if housing markets are not functioning anymore. And it is a really manual what to do if some bubbles occur, what to do if investment is blocked. And I really recommend to read our action plan for affordable housing. And I also would like to recommend further on to build on this action plan of affordable housing and really to implement at the European level, together with you, with the Parliament, with the Commission, but also with the Council and also with the cities and regions. We are here at the Committee of the Regions, a high-level stakeholder group trying to solve the most urgent problems of the housing markets. We have been a multinational group coming from everywhere, from the technical side, from the financial side, from the law side, from the renovation side, from, let's say, the construction side. And we have solutions we can build upon. And this is something crucial at the moment now. We have, if I may say so, a housing momentum now at European level. We have never been so far. And this has also been said by the first panel. We have never been so far. So come on, let's do it. Let's take this chance. And we are ready for it. We would love to help. Thank you.
We'll try, sure.
Okay, and thank you also for your push in this respect. Thank you, Estrella. Thank you, Barbara. I think it's right. You're right. What about? We also saw big stories in our newspapers on the Berlin case. And why are there big stories on this? Because people recognize that affordable, decent housing is a problem. So it's not a problem there. It's also a problem everywhere. And Theresa is sharing on Come on Glasgow, adopt the rent freeze. I think this is indeed something which resonates not only in the institutions, but it resonates among ordinary citizens of Europe who feel and see that there is a real problem at stake. I'd like to make some concluding remarks before giving the floor to the president of the S&D Group, Iratxe García Pérez. Thank you for this also second interesting panel, and perhaps I should say thank you for organizing a whole week around the housing. I think it's indeed clear that we are, on the one hand, making progress in putting the issue on the agenda, but also it's clear that decent and affordable housing needs to be attacked from different corners from the policy making. And I think the European Union can and should play an important role in making sure that indeed everyone has a roof over their heads. And there are mentioning of interesting reports in the chat. I think it's clear that the debate is about a basic human right, and it's about a fight for our political family, but together with stakeholders and local governments, and that we will push for this fight, because a right of a affordable house is indeed a basic human right. I'd like to end by thanking my colleagues, Manuel, Pizarro, Estrella, Dura, Ferrandis, for their great contributions to the panels, for the hard work in the Parliament on these topics, for that matter. I'd like to thank my former colleague, Theresa Griffin, for being as passionate as always on dignity and indeed on the right not to have to choose to pay your rent or pay for water or your energy. I would like to thank Freek Spinnewijn from FEANTSA, Barbara Steenbergen for joining us today and giving their endless commitment to solving the housing question. I think we are all fired up and ready to go. And lastly, I'd like to have a great word of thanks. We cannot applaud for the screen, but I'd like to do so. But organization of this panel and this week has really been great. I think we can all say it's a great success. And here my role ends, and it's now the turn for real concluding remarks by Iratxe García Pérez, the president of our group and one of the persons who took the initiative for having us here together in the Housing Week. Welcome, Iratxe. Iratxe, can you hear me? Can you unmute yourself in this system?
Now it's okay? You can hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Agnes. Thank you for your presentation, and thank you for this opportunity. This initiative that today ends is a clear example of how the European Union can play an important role to protect human rights and make them real for each and every citizen. The right to housing is an essential human right, and raising awareness of this problem should therefore be a priority for our political family. Today, unfortunately, for many people, accessing a decent home is something out of reach. 80 million people in the EU have problems accessing the decent housing. More than 50 million people in Europe struggle to face the cost of housing, to pay the electricity or heating bill, and eviction continues to increase. The number of homeless people is shameful. We cannot accept that 700,000 people have not place to live in the EU. We have to change this reality by 2030. Inequalities in the access of housing is increasing due to the COVID-19 crisis, and it is difficult to understand that at the same time, when the economic crisis is assuming unprecedented proportions, house price continue to grow, and this is happening for two reasons: the lack of programs and investing in public housing to meet the demand of the most disadvantaged people, and speculation in the real estate market. It is time for us, for the Socialists and Democrats, to say enough. Housing cannot remain only commodity. The right to housing be guaranteed for all and done urgently. For us, housing has to be on top of the European agenda. Cities all over Europe are already timing up to deliver innovative solutions to propose housing for all. It's the case in Lisbon, Vienna, or Uppsala. They cannot act alone. The EU, and in particular the member states, should regulate housing, which is not asset like any other, and release public investment to build more housing, particularly social housing in Europe. After this week of intensive work, we have very clear demands and proposals to tackle this issue, and I would like to refer to some of them. The right to housing as a human right must be protected above the interest of speculators. A European deal for housing with a sound monitoring system with the involvement of all levels of policymaking, European, national, regional, and local. Investment in public housing must be multiplied and considered a service of general interest. We need to make it an obligation for governments in the content of the European semester and the fiscal rules. There is life beyond deficits and fiscal rules. The sustainable well-being of our citizens needs to come first. These rules should contribute to improve the lives of people, not the other very one. For this reason, we call for binding targets to ensure the provision of affordable, adequate and social housing, and to reform the fiscal rules accordingly with a golden rule for a social investment. Young people and families must have access to affordable housing in decent conditions. We have to stop speculation in the real estate market and avoid the accumulation of housing and land in the hands of large holders and speculators. Housing has a fundamental right, and being a scarce asset must be distributed in a way that guarantees access to all people. It is also necessary to regulate rental platforms so that they pay the fair taxes and correspond to the profits they make. We cannot allow a single child in Europe to be homeless. The child guarantee must be approved now and provide with the funding that is necessary so that all girls and boys in Europe have adequate housing. European investment, for instance, for the Renovate Wave, a key financial tool of the European Green Deal, must first favor those who need the most, rehabilitate the poorest houses, and invest in the creation of green neighborhoods with public facilities and ecological infrastructure that also fight inequalities, especially in large cities. Finally, I would like to thank to over 600 participants who took part in the various workshops and events, and the many thousand following the web streaming online. I would like also to thank the partners of the Progressive Housing Week, an initiative inspired by the PS Group in the European Committee of the Regions that brought together with the S&D Group, PES, FEPS, and the City of Vienna, but also involve many other partners like Housing Europe, the International Union of Tenants, FEANTSA, etc. Also, I would like to remind you that you have to sign our petition on change.org, Housing for All, to make our voice heard. Only together, we will make the right to housing a reality. Our fights go on. Thank you.